All right, next I'd like to welcome to the stage, we have representatives from Boise Police Department, Garden City Police Department, Ada County Sheriff's Office, as well as Meridian Police Department. So I'll welcome them, let them introduce themselves and hear a little bit more about what our police departments do.
Good morning, my name is Blake Slater with the Boise Police Department. I am one of the crisis intervention officers, and we will talk about a dual response model here in just a minute. But I have been with the city of Boise for about 12 years, and I'm coming up on 29 years of experience.
Good morning, my name is Ashley Horvath. I am a crisis intervention officer with the Meridian Police Department. I've been in law enforcement since 2012, but I've been with the city of Meridian for 6 years.
For those of you that have looked at your program, I am not Troy Isaacs. My name is John Brumbaum with Garden City Police Department, kind of filling in last minute. Been with Garden City for 26-ish years. I'm currently assigned to investigations unit. In our agency, that means everything from graffiti to homicide and everything in between and things outside of that. And spent 7 years internet crimes against children, so that was kind of forte for a little while. Did domestic violence, that kind of stuff. So happy to be here. So.
Hi, I'm Amanda Levis. I work for the Ada County Sheriff's Office. I've been there for 10 years. I started in dispatch and then went to our jail, and I am now on the road, and I'm on our action team. It's a specialty unit for the Sheriff's Office. As far as the map over here, so the Sheriff's Office covers everything that's white, the unincorporated Ada County, as well as the city of Eagle, the city of Star, and the city of Kuna. So the colors up there are the yellow, the blue, and the bright yellow. And then these guys cover, Horvath covers the purple. I can't even see that far. The grayish, I think, is Garden City, and then all the green's Boise City. So there is a difference between city jurisdictions and county jurisdictions. But the counties, I get to go everywhere, basically. So who to call, when to call. Obviously, Courtney just went over who to call and when to call. She was a great presenter. I hate following after her. But if there's any hesitation, for anyone that you guys help, just let them know. Do not ever hesitate to call. There are no stupid questions. If they see something that they're like, I don't know if I should call non-emergency. Let them know that phone number to get in touch with our dispatch. Our dispatch is wonderful. They will lead them to the correct person, whether it's police or maybe a property person or evidence person or something. They have all the resources, so don't ever hesitate to call them. And please plug that number in your phone. Our language access, so we have two different types of language access that we use. We have the language line. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. That was primarily what we used when I first started in dispatch. That's all we had. Now we have, Boise City is so kind to let us use their interpreters, and they're amazing. So hopefully that gets more, that our department and all the agencies will use these interpreters because they're vetted and they're great at their jobs. So I know we have some interpreters here, and thank you guys for what you do. Also, if somebody needs an interpreter, they simply have to ask for it. Hopefully, like I was saying, our officers and our deputies will get to the point where they know, okay, this person doesn't speak English, I need to get an interpreter here. It does take more time, it's more work for them, but hopefully that is just gonna be the standard going forward. But whoever you help, tell them not to hesitate to ask for an interpreter. What to expect when officers arrive. So I don't know if there's a stigma or whatnot in society today for how officers respond to calls, but if you've never had to interact with an officer or a deputy in a high stress situation, I'm sure you have no idea what to expect. And when you have people coming in with lights and sirens on and wanting to separate everybody, and you have no idea like what's happening, are they treating me different? That's not the case. For the most part, we all go to the same calls in the same manner and treat them the same way, whether it's a low priority or a high priority call. So Officer Horvath's gonna go into more of what to expect when we actually arrive on a call.
So the biggest thing to think about when we get on scene is our number one priority is going to be the safety of everybody there. So a lot of times when we get on scene first, we're going to find out, are there injuries? Are there things that we need to get medical attention for? Is there, what is the next steps that need to be taken? So you may get that, hey, is everyone okay? Do they need medical attention? The other thing we're going to do when we start to interview is we're going to separate parties. And that's not to separate them to make them feel like they're alone and by themselves, but especially in, for example, like a domestic violence situation, or potentially that's what we might suspect is going on. We want to make sure that individuals are separated so that if you have a potential victim, they're not feeling pressure by the suspect or the perpetrator in not giving or being forthcoming with all of the information of what actually occurred. So sometimes there is some confusion of, why am I separated from my family or my loved ones? And it's mostly to try to make sure that we can do a thorough investigation and get all of the accurate information of what actually occurred. And then some other things that'll happen is, it's important for people to know that when we first get on scene, we also want to make sure, like I said, there's the safety aspect, right? So sometimes officers might come in and start giving commands depending on the information we have of, we need you to sit down, take your hands out of your pockets, we need to search you, whatever that might be. And a lot of that is just to make sure that not only ourselves, but everyone in the home is safe. And then we're going to have John go through, once our investigation happens, what's next.
Okay, so,
This
yeah.
one's showing
So
full now, so maybe we're
we pull a
missing-
Kaiser Sose, the call's over, investigation's kind of done. I guess I jumped ahead, not doing Kaiser Sose yet. Sorry. Did I mention I'm filling in for Troy? He's smarter than I am, so I apologize. More often than not in every case, but more often than not, when we are on scene and wrapping up the investigation, we are going to speak with the victim and find out how they want to see the incident resolved. Do they want to pursue criminal charges, in which case they've got to be willing to make a statement, they've got to be willing to come to court, some of those things that are going to follow up with. Do they want the person warned in hopes that it doesn't happen again? Do they just want it documented in case something happens down the road? Those are all different kind of options that play into how we wrap up the call. More often than not, like I said, sometimes that's out of the victim's hands. Domestic violence is an incident where the police officer actually is the one that's going to make the decision there, not the victim, so they don't always have a say in that. But we try to respect the wishes as much as we can, because we're there obviously to serve them. If they do want to pursue criminal charges, the way that we go with that, assuming that the investigation warrants criminal charges, we can issue citations in some cases, we can make arrests in some cases, or we can document everything, send it off to the prosecutor's office, and let them make the decision about charging. Can you hit that next one? Yeah. So now it's Kaiser Sose time, and I'm probably dating myself and Kaiser Sose. Yeah. So, hey. Okay, we went poof and disappeared. So after the call is done and we have left and gone on, that doesn't necessarily mean the end of things. There's still oftentimes an investigation going on, hence my job talking about all the different things that we cover and do follow-up investigations on. That can be a little confusing for the people that we are trying to take care of, because we're not there every minute, we're not touching base every second, giving updates and stuff like that. So there's a couple of different ways we can do that. I try to. I was talking with somebody, we are all understaffed and overworked, just like all of you are overworked and understaffed. It's kind of universal in society right now. So best of intentions don't always follow through. So if you're talking with your people, they always have the option of giving a call in, touching base with whoever their investigator is to follow up with that we will try to do that. To segue into one of the programs our speakers coming up, we utilize what are called victim witness coordinators quite a bit to act as a liaison between our victims and law enforcement and prosecutor's office and stuff like that, and they're phenomenal with keeping those things up. copies of the police reports. A lot of times people want that. That's not something that automatically comes, but they do have the ability to request that from whatever agency it is, and certainly free to add additional information. I think been talking long enough.
Well done. Raise your hand if you've seen the movie Police Academy. All right.
You've seen Police Academy, but you haven't seen Usual Suspects?
Right? There. Well done. So we're going to talk about the sexy part of policing, right? Like the shooting and the driving and the crisis intervention. That's right. So if you're familiar with what the term Crisis Intervention Team, CIT, is, our goal in a national policing standard is exactly that. We want to make sure that all of our police officers receive that 40-hour training in the academy or shortly thereafter, and we have very high expectations of our police officers. So at Boise Police, and kind of the expectation for all of our jurisdictions, is our officers receive 40 hours, which is the national standard for crisis intervention training. So here in the Treasure Valley, we are going to the dual responder model. And what that is locally is we have a clinician. My partner Jordan is right up front. We have a master's level clinician. Sam from Meridian is here, partnered with a police officer in our car, and we respond our entire work week with our clinician, right? So our goal is real-time crisis intervention in the field, but every agency manages that slightly differently. So we'll talk about a little bit of that, but let me tell you about why we do those things. So we expect our officers to be professional problem solvers. We also need to train them to be good at what they do. So when you call 911 and you have a police officer that shows up, you also expect them to be good at what they do and to have the information that you're asking for, right? So it is very difficult to have a good foundational knowledge of how community services work. Is anybody in here a resident expert of everything in your community? Nice job, JJ. Well done. You're hired for like your third or fourth job. So it is not simple, and it's tough to keep up on because, for example, if you're in public health care, you know that sometimes those contracts change, right? And who is the provider now and who's going to be the provider next week? So one of the reasons that we have constantly changing curriculum in that CIT program is we expect the officers to keep up on those things, and we also expect them to provide accurate knowledge to the community. So one of the things that we want officers to have a basic fundamental knowledge of is what's available in our community, right? Now, I don't expect our officers to know what's going on in Pocatello. I want them to know what's going on in the city of Boise and who they can access. I also expect them to know, hey, if I have a shortcoming, for example, if I need an interpreter, where can I turn to? If I need an expert in this field, where do I send my client to? If I have somebody who has a dog, and that dog is now stuck inside their car and they're on their way to jail, how do I safeguard that pet? Okay, so it's kind of a complicated thing, but we want to provide officers with a good foundational knowledge, and that crisis intervention team 40-hour class is the expectation. Ooh, look at that. All right, problem solving. So one of the co-responder models that we use is we want our team to be not only good at providing services in the community, but we also want to divert folks who have no reason to have law enforcement contact away from police services. We recognize that there is a difference between the 40-year-old schizophrenic who has been managing their medications for 20 years successfully. We recognize that they don't need law enforcement services. They just need to get back on track with their own providers. That's drastically different than a 22-year-old that just had their first psychotic break in the middle of public and they're flapping their wings, wearing underwear, running down the middle of the street, right? That requires immediate intervention from police. And then we can divert those folks from police to emergency services, back to the hospital, and get them on the right track with medications and things like that. We also want to ensure that customer service and that continuity of care continues. So once law enforcement has interaction, we can actually add notes to our call so that the next time law enforcement response is needed at that house or with that person, they're like, hey, we have these techniques. We know that Jacob has a diagnosis of this, and Jacob's mother can be reached at this phone number, and Jacob receives treatment at this provider. And so we now have some roadmap of where we're going to take this case and kind of an idea to accelerate that entire process because it's already been maneuvered in some degree. We also want to make sure that we're providing good professional development for our own staff. So the expectation for the clinicians is to make sure that they have working knowledge of trends and access to information that they provide law enforcement officers directly. So that professional development internally is incredibly important. We not only expect our officers to have the 40-hour crisis intervention team training, but we also do annual training with the expectation that they are keeping up on legislative changes, maybe a change in procedural processing. Has anybody seen what we call the wrap, the little duffel bag full of gear that we take out, we kind of wrap them almost like a straitjacket, but then we can pick somebody up and just kind of slide them into an ambulance? So if you've ever watched an old episode of Cops where they pull out what we call a linear restraint or a hobble, and they kind of tie that person up like a team roping event at the rodeo, right? It is very, it's an egregious process. Like it looks kind of violent. It's very difficult to pick those people up. So one of the greatest changes we've made within the last 2 or 3 years, is we have this new wrap system that allows us not only to handcuff them more comfortably, but it also allows us to sit them up instead of lay them face down, right? To reduce any potential for positional asphyxia and all of those things. But more importantly, they're perfectly positioned to pick them up and put them on a bed, right, for medical transport. So that works super, super great. When you call law enforcement, you can actually ask for a CIT officer. It's very helpful if you know that this is not imminent, right? I know that I'm going to need some assistance. I have an articulable need for somebody that has crisis intervention training. I can ask for a CIT officer. And more than likely, almost any officer that you're going to get has already attended that CIT 40. You can also ask for a team, as long as it's not imminent. We typically do follow-up. And then we will also be able to provide de-escalation techniques, work within hopefully within your realm and our professional contact list to provide additional resources. I think Ashley's going to talk about our crisis centers.
Thank you. So before we pull into the crisis center, you guys heard earlier from dispatch or emergency dispatch about 911. But something that has been pushed out, so like Courtney talked about earlier, there was a need in the past. You would go from city to city and there was a different phone number to get a hold of the police department or a different phone number to get a hold of the fire department. Well, they streamlined that into 911. What we've done now with crisis hotlines is streamlined it nationwide. So now if somebody is needing help and they don't need to or want to call law enforcement, but they are needing a crisis hotline, they can call or text 988. 988 is open 24/7, and the crisis call takers are actually phenomenally trained. So they are trained to de-escalate the individual that's on the other end of the phone, and then they're also trained to create a safety plan for them, and it's a safety plan for here and now. So it's not necessarily something that's long-term, but it's something to get them through that moment or through that crisis in that moment. And so 988 is a fantastic resource. A lot of times when we interact with like the teens or the younger population who's very comfortable with texting, we also tell them text because you're available to text anytime. So if you don't already know about 988, I'd highly recommend sharing that with your communities. And then you also have the Pathways Community Crisis Center. That is here in Boise. It's over by the mall. They are open 24/7, 365 days a year. It's a great resource where individuals can go. They can stay for up to 24 hours. As they go in, there is an intake process where they sit down with a social worker and they go through an evaluation, and that person can guide them to the correct community resources. But the individuals can also stay there. They have beds, they have showers, they have food, things like that. It's a great place to send an individual who may be in crisis, even if it's not a mental health crisis. Maybe they're going through a stressful situation at home, or maybe they've been in a verbal argument with their spouse and they just need some time to cool off, but maybe they don't have money for a hotel. Pathways Crisis Center is also a fantastic place for them to go. And I think this is it.
Officer accountability. So whether we are doing awesome work or whether we're doing not so awesome work, we do want to know. I would speak for every one of us that we want to know if we're doing something not good, because how else are we going to correct it? And then also we do want to know the good too, because sometimes I want to feel good about myself. So for the sheriff's office specifically, I can say where you can go for the accountability. You can go to our website, you scroll down to the bottom, there's a contact us, click on that, and then right in the center of the page is the feedback. You can give good feedback, bad feedback, you can ask questions. It's awesome. So like I said, please let us know how we're doing the good, the bad, and the ugly so that we can keep doing the great or make the bad good. And I don't know if any of you want to talk about your accountability on your websites or whatnot. I think that's it for us. If anyone has any questions. JJ.
So I have two questions. The first one goes to Officer Horvath. When you were talking about splitting up families when you're doing an investigation, is there an extra step or something that you do when it's a family that's new to the country that doesn't understand English and doesn't understand what you're doing, especially when you don't have a translator there right away?
Yeah, so the biggest thing when it comes to separating families is, especially if it's related to a crime, at least for the Meridian Police Department, we don't want to use a family member for that translation because we want to make sure they're not withholding anything or not asking the questions that we're asking. It's not that we don't trust them, it's just for us to do a thorough and complete investigation, we want to use translation services. Somebody who's impartial, there's no emotional connection, right? So in those moments, a lot of times we can speak with the family and maybe use a family member who does speak that language and say, hey, just so you know, we have a translator on the way, or we're trying to get a translator on the phone. But that'll buy us a little bit of time. It might be a little bit awkward for a couple minutes if we can't have that back and forth communication, but we really want to make sure we're getting them the right services. Does that answer your question? Okay.
And then I didn't get your name, so I'm just going to say not Officer Troy Isaacs. And you're talking about how you work with the victims and they get to decide if they're going to press charges or not. But when you notice that they're in immediate danger, is there a stance you guys can take to convince them to press charges, or is that not something you can do?
So it's really very situationally dependent, right? Kind of depends on what we're investigating and the circumstances thereof. It's very frustrating. I'm sure everybody's been there at some time or another where we can see that the person that we're trying to help is making some bad choices and that we're going to be back. And we don't always get to force them to go otherwise, right? It's greatest strength and greatest weakness of our society is that people get to kind of say how their lives are going to go and what mistakes they're going to make or don't make. In certain circumstances where there is like an imminent threat, we may be able to take some sort of an action on that person or whatnot. I mentioned victim witness coordinators before as well. A lot of times they can, when they come out and meet with a victim, at least in my experience, because they're not law enforcement, sometimes they're a little bit more successful at having that person go elsewhere anyway, or at least create that separation. If not pursuing actual charges. Anybody else want to throw something in on that, or? There you go.
Hey, JJ, I'm going to add one little piece to that. So there are extreme circumstances, and I'll use domestic violence as a good example. So there are times when we use victimless prosecution. So we believe that the safety of the victim is paramount, and so we will intercede on the behalf of the victim, even if they don't want to press charges. We are going to take steps to safeguard them, right? So there are times and places to do that. Sometimes it makes it difficult now that there has been a legislative change that doesn't allow us to make a custodial arrest on a misdemeanor crime not committed in my presence, and so we actually have to have somebody else to sign a citizen's arrest form. So there's some complicating factors to that. But yeah, domestic violence or violence in the home is one of those times where the state has given us a little bit more latitude to safeguard the family. Does that answer that? Other questions? Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. There is a tragic incident happened, I think last year, not far from here, at the Jackson. A kid was shot at that time, and the mom claims that she called the police before that, and she told the police about the mental health of that kid. But mom claims that the police was not taking care of the mental health, and that kid lost his life in that incident. So is there any new after that incident? That was shock for the community, really. It was for hard also for the officers, that situation. Is there any change with the guidelines? Is change with the training, with the law enforcement, with the Boise Police Department after that incident?
So you're talking about the Zach Snow case. So essentially, yes, I'm very familiar with that case. The short answer to your question is there has been no change because the process and the procedure that we had in place was appropriate, and I'll tell you why. So we expect all of our officers to be crisis intervention team 40-hour trained, every one of them. And we also don't put our clinicians in harm's way. So we have an actively suicidal person. We are not going to put a clinician or a dual response team in harm's way. So we will have CIT officers respond to a suicidal subject, and we probably handle 3 or 4 of those every day, if not a half a dozen or more. So the response will always be a patrol response because of the imminent threat to both himself and others around him. So there is no change to that response because the response was appropriate. Does that answer that question? Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering, you said that you can use Boise Police Department interpreters, and does that mean that the person then gets an in-person interpreter? And then also I wanted to ask, when you presented the 988 behavioral health crisis line and the pathways, if those have language services as well.
Hey, Travis, are we going to be talking about interpreters a little bit later? If not, I can answer that real quick.
Mike, do you want me to answer the interpreter question?
Go ahead. Yes.
So we have an interpreter program at Boise Police Department. So we have a list of contract interpreters that are background checked and trained by us. They're already very experienced interpreters before they're brought into that program. Shelley Sonnenberg started that program 12 to 15 years ago, and we've maintained that. There's an MOU for every agency in this valley to use all those interpreters as well. So they're available for in-person response as well as over the phone. And our officers find as they use them, they stop using language line because those interpreters are also cultural brokers and help them actually get to the bottom of the situation a lot and really educate officers about what else is really going on in that situation, right? You guys help us out a lot. Learn a lot with I have officers come up to us all the time. Travis is now managing that program, and they're like, hey, I use so-and-so, and I didn't even know this. And they're just like, they can't wait to unload all the stuff they learn from the officer who originally didn't want to handle that language barrier call. So it's a great program that we've had for a long time. We'd love to continue expanding it. And then also, like, that side note for us is, like, we're putting money back into our community instead of paying language line for a service. And then we're also solving problems more thoroughly. So we have both. Sometimes language line is just so much faster and more accessible, at least for that interim. And then if they can, but anything more, like, more serious, we might use language line, but we'll get an interpreter there on scene because we know that's the best quality interpretation.
And that's also available to the other police departments, like Ada County Sheriff can use them as well?
Yep, so the sheriff's office does pretrial sentencing and so everybody in the sheriff's office can use them. Dispatch can, and they have for a few really high maintenance people, but language line is way easier for them for the timeliness of their services. Meridian, Ada County, Garden City, all of those officers can use them as well. So we have a memorandum of understanding that everybody can contact them as long as our interpreters sign off on allowing those other agencies to use them at the same rate that we've contracted them for.
And then for 988 and Pathways, they do have language services. I don't know who they're contracted with, but we've asked those questions before. Just like say, if you were to go to St. Luke's or St. Al's, they also have language services available to help interpret. Any other questions? Oh, one more over here.
So you guys mentioned briefly about victim witness liaison. Can you kind of describe that a little bit more? That's a position within the Boise Police?
So those are not unique to Boise Police. We are going to have one or two speaking this afternoon. So if it's not too rude, I'm going to kind of punt that.
Yeah, my
because
question can wait. Thank you.
I'm going to punt that because I'll let the experts talk about what they do, as opposed to me kind of trying to translate it. So hopefully that's fair. Okay.